What is going on, everybody? I am back today to do another book and movie review, and this one I'm very excited for because, once again, similar to the video I did on 1922 recently, I have seen this film before, but I had never read the novella that it's based on. And this is also a work from Stephen King. Obviously, Stephen King's works get adapted into films quite frequently. And I just read The Mist for the first time this year, and I was very excited to read it because this is a movie I've seen a few times, and it's actually a movie that when I saw it the first time when I was younger, I didn't really like it all that much. And my perspective on it has changed quite drastically as I've grown into adulthood. And I appreciate a lot more about it. And the more I revisit it, the more nuance you can uncover and the more you can unpack about just exactly what the movie is trying to say, especially with its third act. And so I was really interested to see how similar the novella was. And after reading the novella and watching the movie again, I'm really excited to discuss The Mist with you today. The Mist is written by Stephen King and directed by Frank Darabont. After a violent storm, a dense cloud of mist envelops a small marine town, trapping artist David Drayton and his 5-year-old son in a local grocery store with other people. They soon discover the mist conceals deadly horrors that threaten their lives and, worse, their sanity. So, as I said, I've seen this movie a few times, and I'd never read the novella before. And the novella, I read it for the first time, and it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. Stephen King has this way of bringing you into a world and really immersing you in that world, and I enjoyed it. But what I will say, and this doesn't happen very often, I think I said this in my Carrie review as well, I like the movie more than I enjoy the novella because I feel like Frank Darabont in the film is able to really dive into these characters and build on their dynamics a lot more than Stephen King. I feel like Stephen King with the novella is much more just trying to create this confined space, build up some tension as to the looming threat outside. Obviously, we still have the crazed religious character in the novella, but I don't feel like she's focused on as heavily in the novella as she is in the film. And her character and building that tension in the movie is what really packs a punch because she's just as much of a threat as the monsters outside. And I don't think the book does as good of a job juggling those things as the film does, but I'll break it all down when I discuss the plot in a little bit more detail. So in the film, David Drayton is played by Thomas Jane, who was also in 1922 that I just did a review on recently, which is pretty funny. And at the beginning of the film, he's in his studio working, similar to the novella. He works on creating movie posters and he hand draws them, and they actually make a reference that he drew the poster to The Thing. At least that's what it looks like in his office space. And he's painting this new poster, and while he's in his room, a tree flies through the window. There's this horrible storm, and the next morning his family goes outside. The storm has caused all this damage. He ends up going next door and talking to his neighbor because it's his neighbor's tree. He tries to get insurance information from the neighbor. The two of them talk, and he notices the neighbor has had a tree fall on his car. And he talks to his wife. His wife says, "Hey, we don't really have any supplies out here. We're really not going to make it through the weekend. Can you go to the store and pick some things up?" So he says, "Yeah, I'll take our kid and we'll go into town and get some groceries." And so the neighbor says, "Hey, can I get a ride with you since I don't have a car? I've got to pick some things up and make some arrangements." So they drive to town together. They go into the grocery store. Everyone is in the grocery store buying groceries after the storm they're trying to build up in their houses. And after being in the store for a while, this man comes bolting through the parking lot, and he's bleeding, and he says, "A mist is coming. There's something in the mist. Don't go outside." After running inside, this woman gets really freaked out because the mist pulls in, and she says, "My kids are at home. I have to go home and get my kids." They all try to convince her not to leave. She walks out there anyway, and something pulls her into the mist, and she dies. So everyone has to lock themselves into this grocery store, and we get this enormous cast of characters that are grocery store employees. There's people that work in the military in the town that are in there, people who have lived there for years. There's the crazy religious character, and essentially you're building this micro society where we get subsects of people from the larger scope of what our society looks like in this confined space. And it's like a blow up of these people trying to figure out the best way to survive and how to survive and try to figure out what this threat actually is. And what I'll say, the novel is very quick. I feel like when I was reading it, there are moments that sat with me, but for the most part, it was just the threat of the creatures outside. I was less concerned with the dynamics of the characters in the grocery store because they're not built upon as much as Frank Darabont builds on them in the movie. And that's what's so impressive about the film, is that in this 2-hour runtime, he's able to give you enough information about most of these characters and their motivations to really create this interesting commentary on our society as a whole. Because the crazy religious woman, played by Marcia Gay Harden, she's phenomenal in this film. She's one of the best villains in any horror movie. She's telling everyone in the store that this is God's wrath and that Armageddon is coming, and she starts swaying people slowly in the grocery store to believe her, and little things happen surrounding her that she thinks she's this divine prophet of God and that she can save everyone's soul. And I think that's really indicative of our culture now, especially in a culture not just necessarily when it comes to religion, but when you think of Trump's America and the people who support Trump as a president, and how it's so much less about politics and political stance, and it's a very cult mentality. Anything he says, they will believe. It doesn't matter if it's fact or fiction. They're gonna believe it because they essentially worship him as this deity. And I think her character is a reflection of that culture now, and how people just blindly follow him and will do anything that he says no matter what. And I thought it was really interesting watching that because it's so reflective of so many subsets of our culture. And her character just really starts off as kind of like, she says these crazy things and people are like, oh, she's just a crazy old lady. And then as things progressively start to heat up, her character becomes more and more of a threat. And I think the way that that's written in the film is fantastic. Whereas she has some lines in the novella, but it doesn't pack nearly as much of a punch as her character does in the movie. Actual creature designs in this, the CGI is a little rough around the edges. And I know after reading the comments, I watched the version in color this time, but apparently when Frank Darabont shot it originally, his original intention was for the film to be portrayed in black and white. And honestly, I think viewing this in black and white would be a positive experience because of the fact of how the creatures look. Some of the CGI is really rough around the edges in moments, and I think that black and white would help mask that a little bit, give it much more of like a retro feel. I don't even care that the CGI is rough around the edges because this movie is relentless and horrifying. Every second you're watching this movie, it conveys this feeling of hopelessness, unlike a lot of horror movies I've watched. So many horror movies from very early on, you're given these way outs. You're given these abilities to try to figure out what's going on and escape it. In this, from very early on, it feels like there is no hope, that there's no way of getting around this. And I think it's really interesting because, like I said, I feel like the whole thing is a commentary on society, and there's some kind of direct at the camera nods conversations that are very on the nose, but I like a lot of the subtext and the nuance and the way that the characters are portrayed as well. And the creatures just add to that and create that insane, horrifying experience. And I love how each one has a very different design. That's one of the things I do love, is that even though they're rough around the edges, they're all really unique. And I think that that's what makes it such an interesting experience. And like I said, the power dynamics that are built up in the grocery store are really interesting. Our lead character becomes really close to this woman in the store who's an elderly woman who is just trying to fight for her survival. There's a younger woman there that he becomes close to, and they all are the rational thinkers. They're the ones who are like, what is our best option to get out of this scenario? And then you have his next door neighbor who is very reluctant to believe. He doesn't want to believe anything that he says. You have the crazy religious woman who is just trying to tell people that this is a sign from God. And you have people who are easily swayed. William Sadler plays this character who's kind of like country bumpkin, and he's like back and forth. Like, he swings back and forth through the whole movie as to who he believes and what side he's on. And I think what's so interesting about all those characters is that that's very reflective of our society. There are a ton of people in this movie that you're just like, like, I know that person. This person would act that exact way if this situation presented itself. And I just think those dynamics are so interesting, and it's great because for a horror movie, there's some truly terrifying scenes with these creatures ripping people apart. But there's also so much tension and dread built in just the character interaction. And I think being able to build that tension and dread in those character interactions is so fantastic. And I love the cinematography in this, especially some of the handheld moments. It's really jarring, and it really kind of puts you in with those characters, and I appreciate it a lot. There's one more thing I want to talk about with the movie, and I can't talk about it without spoiling it. So if you've never seen The Mist, turn the video off now, come back, watch the rest of my review later. But I want to talk about the ending, because the ending, when I was younger, really irritated me, and I hated the ending. But the older I get, the more I appreciate the ending. I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So in the novella The Mist, after everything blows up and they escape, David and his son and the younger woman, and I think there's one or two other characters that escape with him in a car. He drives back to his house. He realizes his wife isn't there anymore. She's probably been killed. And there's this like monologue delivered by David's character who says, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. There's no driving off into the sunset. I really have no idea what is going to happen. We're going to try to drive. We're going to try to have enough gas to get from one place to another. And it's left completely open-ended and ambiguous. You have no idea how it ends. They're in the car together. They leave. And it's interesting that Stephen King takes that route, because normally his books end relatively finite, at least what I've read recently. He doesn't really leave much more room to interpretation. And what I find interesting is Frank Darabont's is so much more dour and horrifying and depressing. And Stephen King actually said in an interview that if he had the option, he would have gone back and reworked the novel to end it the same way Darabont ends his movie. And at the end of Darabont's film, they get in the car together, and it's David, his son, that young woman, and two of the older people that are at the grocery store. They get in the car and they drive back to his house. He sees that his wife's no longer there. They start driving away, and the car completely runs out of gas. And he has a gun, and he has 4 bullets left in it. And they realize, they hear the monsters coming, and essentially they have this collective conversation of, there's no way we're going to survive. These bugs are going to come and eat us alive. We're all going to die. And they all come to the decision together that it would be better to kill themselves instead of being eaten alive and tortured by these monsters, that it's a quicker death. And there's only 4 bullets, so David decides, I'll be the one to get ripped apart by the monsters, essentially. Like, I'll let you guys take the easier way out. And he ends up killing his son, the young woman, and the 2 elderly people. And I remember seeing that the first time and just being like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this just happened. And he gets out of his car, and he's ready to let the monsters take him. And he gets out of his car, and the mist starts to clear away. The military comes in, and they're destroying all the bugs, and he's essentially killed them for nothing. They died, and he survived, and they've gotten rid of them, and he lets out the most guttural, heart-wrenching scream you've ever heard, and it is brutal. And the ending of that is so relentless and terrifying, and it makes a lot of sense, because when you think about Darabont, who directed The Shawshank Redemption, who's directed these really phenomenal films, he's made movies that pack a really heavy emotional punch. And I think what's interesting about that ending, when I was young, I think the hopelessness irritated me, because I was like, why would someone be so hopeless? Why would someone not want to provide any sort of hope or ability to move on from this horrible experience? But I think what is really interesting is that in some of the social causes that we've had over the years, people have to fight really hard for their rights. People have to push and put their lives on the line. And a lot of times people's lives are lost. And a lot of times terrible things happen to people that it's not right, and they don't deserve it. And I think what Darabont is getting at here, after showing us a very realistic depiction of how our society is broken down, is that sometimes the people with the right intentions don't survive, and that sometimes when you think it's over and that all hope is lost, the monsters clear out of the way, but there are casualties on the way, and people are lost, and you have to try to find some way to move on, even at your most hopeless moment. And I think leaving David's character alive shows a very reflective representation of people who have sacrificed everything, friends, family, their livelihood, for a good cause. And yes, the cause in this movie is the way to survive and the intelligent decisions to make. And I think their characters are shown as the rational, intelligent ones who have the best means for survival. And so to me, that's reflective of those, you know, people who are fighting for equal rights, people who are fighting for all these really important causes in our country, and that there are casualties, there are people who get hurt. And I think leaving his character alive after having to make a really hopeless decision is reflective of what a lot of people have gone through for ages and ages fighting for important causes. And it was even more poignant this time around. And I love the ending of this way more than the novella. And like I said, I think both of them are good, but the movie is great. The novella is a very quick read, and it didn't leave as lasting of an impression on me as the film did. And if you get the opportunity, read the novella and then watch the movie, but I would highly recommend watching the movie in black and white if you can find it, because I think it would add to the aesthetic and really pack even more of a punch. And I already can't wait to revisit this again. So have you read or seen The Mist? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I think the book is really good and the movie is absolutely fantastic. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.